I knew I was being set up for humiliation the moment Clarissa Hartwell placed that thick manila envelope on the mahogany dining table and smiled at me like a spider who'd just finished spinning her web. 3 days before the wedding, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, we thought it would be prudent to have you sign this little prenuptial agreement. The crystal chandelier above cast shadows across the papers inside, but the intent was crystal clear. They thought I was a gold digger about to marry into their precious family fortune. What they didn't know was that I had $79 million sitting quietly in offshore accounts, and I'd been preparing for this exact moment for months. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. The scene was perfectly orchestrated, like everything the Hartwell family did. We were gathered in their sprawling estate in Windermere Hills, the kind of old money mansion that screamed generational wealth from every marble, column, and oil painting. The dining room could have seated 20, but tonight it felt intimate in the most suffocating way possible. My fiancé, Trevor Hartwell, sat beside me looking uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. Across from us sat his parents, like judges at a tribunal. Clarissa, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars, and beside her, Harold Hartwell, a man who'd built his real estate empire by crushing anyone who dared to stand in his way. It's really quite standard, Harold added, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that wealthy men perfect over decades of looking down on others. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned back in his chair like a king granting audience. Nothing personal, you understand. We just want to protect what we've built. The way he said protect made it sound like I was some kind of infectious disease that might contaminate their bloodline. I'd been dating Trevor for 2 years, and in all that time, his parents had treated me like an expensive mistake he'd eventually outgrow. They'd smile during family dinners while making subtle comments about my humble background and how refreshing it was to meet someone so down-to-earth. Translation: poor and beneath their social standing. They assumed I was a struggling marketing coordinator from Riverside who'd somehow managed to snare their Harvard-educated son. They weren't entirely wrong about the first part. I had grown up in Riverside, the daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts at the textile factory just to keep the lights on. What they didn't know was the rest of the story. The part where I'd turned a small inheritance from my grandmother into a tech startup that I quietly sold to a Silicon Valley giant 5 years ago. The part where I'd been living modestly by choice, not necessity. The part where their protection was like a toddler trying to guard Fort Knox with a plastic sword. I suppose you'll want some time to read through it, Clarissa continued, though her tone suggested I shouldn't take too much time. We've had our lawyers drop something fair. You'll be well taken care of if things don't work out, of course. The way she said, when things don't work out, was barely concealed. In her mind, this marriage was temporary, a phase, something Trevor would eventually come to his senses about. I glanced at Trevor, hoping to see some flicker of defense, some sign that he'd stand up for me. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he wanted to disappear into the Persian rug beneath his feet. Mom, Dad, maybe we could discuss this at a better time? Nonsense, Harold cut him off with a wave of his manicured hand. The wedding is in 3 days. If Autumn is serious about joining this family, she'll understand the necessity. The way he said my name made it sound like something distasteful he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. That's when I realized this wasn't just about protecting their wealth. This was about power, about putting me in my place, about making sure I understood exactly where I stood in their hierarchy. They wanted me to feel small, desperate, grateful for whatever crumbs they were willing to scatter my way. They wanted me to sign that prenup not just as a legal document, but as an admission of inferiority, a confession that I was exactly what they thought I was, a nobody who'd gotten lucky. Of course, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest like a storm gathering strength. I completely understand your concerns. I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing against the expensive paper. I could feel Clarissa's satisfied smile without even looking up. She thought she'd won.
They both did. But as I sat there in that opulent dining room, surrounded by portraits of dead Hartwells who probably were just as arrogant and entitled as their descendants, I felt something that surprised even me. Not hurt, not embarrassment, not even anger, really. What I felt was anticipation. Because while they'd been planning this ambush for weeks, maybe months, I'd been playing a much longer game.
They thought they were dealing with some small-town girl who'd be intimidated by their lawyers and their legacy and their threats disguised as generosity. They had no idea that the woman sitting across from them had been featured in Forbes under a pseudonym, that her investment portfolio made their old money look like pocket change, that she'd been quietly documenting every slight, every insult, every moment of casual cruelty for 2 years. The prenup they wanted me to sign was going to be the biggest mistake of their entitled lives. And in 3 days, at what they assumed would be my wedding day humiliation, I was going to teach the Hartwell family exactly what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. I looked up and smiled at Clarissa, the same false sweetness she'd shown me. "I'll need tonight to review everything thoroughly," I said. "Such an important decision deserves careful consideration." "Of course, dear," she replied, already tasting victory. If she only knew what was coming. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. 5 years before Clarissa Hartwell slid that prenup across her dining table like a weapon disguised as paperwork, I was hunched over my laptop in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Riverside at 2:47 in the morning. Empty coffee cups formed a small city around my workspace, and the glow from my screen was the only light cutting through the darkness. My neighbors were long asleep, but I was wide awake, fingers flying across the keyboard as I worked on something that would change everything. The apartment was nothing special. Thin walls, a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains, and a view of the parking lot behind Chen's Corner Market. But it was mine, paid for with the $15,000 my grandmother had left me when she passed. $15,000 that most people would have used for a car or college loans. Instead, I'd used it as seed money for something much bigger. I wasn't supposed to be building a revolutionary data analytics platform at 24. I was supposed to be grateful for my entry-level position at Morrison & Associates Marketing, answering phones and making copies for men in suits who talked down to me like I was still in high school. But late at night, when the world was quiet, I worked on my real project, something that would make their condescending smiles seem pathetic in comparison. The idea had come to me during one of those mind-numbing Morrison meetings where executives complained about not understanding their customer data. "If only we could predict consumer behavior patterns," they'd mutter, while I sat in the corner taking notes they'd never read. I'd gone home that night thinking, what if we could? What if there was a way to analyze purchasing patterns so accurately that businesses could predict market trends months in advance? So I started building it, night after night, weekend after weekend. The algorithm was elegant in its complexity, weaving together social media sentiment, economic indicators, seasonal patterns, and demographic data into something that could forecast consumer behavior with 94% accuracy. I called it TrendScope, and it was going to revolutionize how companies understood their markets. But I was smart about it. I'd watched enough episodes of tech documentaries to know that ideas got stolen, that small inventors got crushed by corporations, and that trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. So I did everything right. I filed patents under my own name, copyrighted every line of code, documented every breakthrough with timestamps and digital signatures. My grandmother had always told me, "Trust in God, honey, but lock your car." I trusted my work, but I locked it down tight. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in March. I'd been running test after test, watching my algorithm predict market shifts with increasing accuracy. But that night, something clicked. The patterns became clearer, the predictions sharper. I ran the program against historical data from the past 5 years, and it nailed every major market trend with surgical precision. The dot-com bubble, the housing market shift, the rise of social media commerce, it predicted all of it.
I sat there in my tiny apartment, staring at the screen, realizing I was looking at something worth millions, maybe tens of millions. My hands were shaking as I saved the final version and backed it up to 3 separate encrypted drives. This wasn't just a program anymore. It was my ticket to a completely different life. But I kept working at Morrison, kept playing the part of the eager young employee who was grateful for the opportunity to make copies and fetch coffee. I'd smile when Mr. Morrison called me kiddo, and nod when Mrs. Patterson from HR made comments about how I should be more realistic about my career aspirations, all well knowing that the laptop bag slung over my shoulder contained something that would make their entire company look like a lemonade stand. The real test came when I started shopping Trendscope around to potential buyers. I was careful, selective. I'd learned enough about business to know that the first offer is never the best offer and that desperation is the fastest way to get fleeced. I reached out to 3 major tech companies through encrypted channels, each one thinking they were the only ones I was talking to.
The bidding war started quietly. Dataflow Industries offered $20 million. Cybermetrics Corporation countered with $35, but it was Nexigen Solutions that understood what they were looking at. Their CTO, a brilliant woman named Dr. Rebecca Sterling, flew out to meet me personally. We sat in a coffee shop in downtown Riverside, the same neighborhood where I'd grown up thinking $20 was a lot of money, and she offered me $79 million for exclusive rights to Trendscope. "This isn't just an algorithm," she said, leaning forward across the small table. "This is the future of predictive commerce. You've built something that will change how businesses think about their customers." She slid a preliminary offer across the table. "We want you to name your price." I didn't name a price. I accepted hers. $79 million paid out over 6 months to minimize tax implications, with the final payment landing in my account just 3 weeks before I met Trevor Hartwell at that charity gala in Windermere Hills. But here's the thing that made it all perfect. I kept living like I was still that marketing coordinator from Riverside. Same modest apartment, same used Honda Civic, same wardrobe from department store clearance racks. The money sat quietly in offshore accounts, growing through careful investments while I played a role that was becoming increasingly useful. When I started dating Trevor, his parents' immediate assumption about my financial status wasn't an insult. It was a strategic advantage. They looked at my simple clothes and my humble address and saw exactly what I wanted them to see: a gold digger with nothing to lose and everything to gain from their family's wealth. For 2 years, I'd endured their condescension with the patience of someone playing a much longer game. Every snide comment about my background, every passive-aggressive suggestion that I wasn't good enough for their son, every moment they made me feel small, I filed it all away. Not as wounds to nurse, but as ammunition to use. They thought they knew who they were dealing with. A desperate girl from the wrong side of town who'd gotten lucky and snagged their precious heir. They had no idea that the woman they were trying to humiliate had already won a game they didn't even know was being played. The prenup they were so eager for me to sign was going to be the match that lit the fuse on their own destruction. Because while they'd been planning to protect their assets, I'd been building something far more powerful than old money. I'd been building new money. And patience. And a very, very long memory. I should have known that Thursday evening would be the night everything finally exploded. Bad revelations seem to hit when you're least prepared, when you're vulnerable and exposed, thinking you still have time to figure things out. I was sitting in Trevor's downtown apartment, surrounded by wedding chaos. Fabric samples scattered across the coffee table, catering menus marked with sticky notes, and a guest list that had grown beyond recognition thanks to his mother's essential additions. The apartment itself was a study in expensive minimalism, all clean lines and neutral colors that screamed interior designer rather than personal taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Riverside Financial District, and I could see the lights from the Morrison and Associates building, where I'd once pretended to be grateful for a paycheck that wouldn't cover Trevor's monthly wine budget. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor was pacing near the kitchen island, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it.
He'd been agitated all evening, checking his phone constantly and avoiding eye contact. I knew the signs by now. This was how he looked when his parents had gotten into his head about something, when they'd applied just enough pressure to make him squirm without giving him the backbone to resist. "We need to talk," he finally said, those 4 words that never led anywhere good. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation that made my stomach clench. I set down the invitation sample I was reviewing, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "What about it? I told your parents I'd review everything thoroughly." I'd actually spent exactly 47 minutes reading through their lawyer's handiwork, and it was even worse than I had anticipated. The document wasn't just insulting, it was medieval in its assumptions about what I deserved and what I was worth. "Enlighten me," I said, though I could already feel the conversation spiraling towards something ugly. Trevor grabbed his phone from the counter and started scrolling, his fingers moving with the nervous energy of someone about to deliver bad news. His parents had their investigator run a more thorough background check, he said without looking up. The words hit like ice water in my veins. An investigator. They'd hired someone to dig into my life, to verify their assumptions about my unworthiness.
And I kept my voice level, though inside I was calculating rapidly. My financial records were sealed tight, my real assets hidden behind corporate structures and offshore trusts that would take a team of forensic accountants months to unravel. But still, the audacity of it stole my breath. "They found some things," Trevor continued, finally meeting my eyes, "about your credit history, about how much you make at Morrison, about your mother's situation." The way he said situation made it sound shameful, like my mother's decades of working double shifts to keep us afloat was something to be embarrassed about rather than admired. He turned his phone toward me, and I saw a printed email on the screen. My hands clenched involuntarily as I read the subject line, "Background Report, Autumn Marie Chen, Confidential." They'd reduced my entire life to a bullet-pointed list of perceived deficiencies. Single mother household, community college education, current salary $34,000 annually, credit score 680, no significant assets or investments detected. "They're concerned," Trevor said, and the fact that he was speaking for them rather than himself told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay, about the financial disparity, about whether you fully understand what you'd be marrying into. I stood up slowly, the wedding planning materials sliding off my lap and scattering across the hardwood floor like fallen leaves. "What I'd be marrying into," I repeated, tasting each word like poison. "You mean your money." "It's not about the money," Trevor said quickly, though we both knew that was exactly what it was about. "It's about protecting the family legacy, the businesses, the foundation." He was reciting talking points now, his mother's words coming out of his mouth like he was a ventriloquist's dummy. "The foundation," I said, thinking about the Hartwell Family Foundation that spent more money on galas than it donated to actual causes. Of course, can't have someone from my background contaminating that legacy. Trevor's face flushed red, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he pulled up another document on his phone. He swiped through pages of legal text, and even from across the room, I could see the numbers. In the event of divorce, I would receive exactly $50,000 for each year of marriage, capped at $500,000 total. No claim to any business assets, no rights to property acquired before the marriage, no spousal support beyond the initial settlement. "They think I'm a prostitute," I said flatly. "That's what this is. They're literally putting a price tag on how much they think I'm worth per year of services rendered. Autumn, don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Trevor, your parents hired an investigator to prove I'm not good enough for you. They've calculated exactly how little they think I deserve if this marriage fails.
And you're standing there defending them? He opened his mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. 2 years of swallowed insults, of smiled-through humiliations, of pretending their condescension didn't cut like glass, it all came pouring out at once. Do you know what your mother said to me at the engagement party when you were getting drinks? She told me I should be realistic about my expectations and grateful for the opportunity, like marrying you was charity work. She didn't mean, she absolutely meant it. I cut him off. And your father? He told the Whitmore family that you were going through a phase and that they shouldn't worry because these things work themselves out. I was standing there, right there, and he talked about me like I was invisible. Trevor's phone slipped from his suddenly limp fingers, clattering onto the counter. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely shocked. He said that? He said that! I grabbed my purse from the couch, suddenly needing to be anywhere but in this sterile apartment with this weak man who would never choose me over his family's approval. Wait, Trevor called as I headed for the door. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob and turned back to look at him. Really look at him. The expensive haircut, the designer clothes, the apartment that cost more per month than my mother had made in a year. He was handsome in that clean-cut, privileged way that I'd once found attractive. But now all I could see was weakness. A man who would always choose the path of least resistance, who would always defer to whoever held the most power in the room. "There's nothing to negotiate," I said quietly. "Your parents have made their position clear, and so have you." I walked out of his apartment and down to the parking garage, my heels echoing in the concrete space like gunshots. My hands were steady as I unlocked my Honda Civic, the same car his mother had once suggested I might want to upgrade before the wedding photos. As I drove through the Windermere Hills neighborhoods, past mansions that glowed like lanterns in the darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years.
Relief. Not heartbreak or anger or devastation, just pure, crystalline relief that the mask had finally slipped, that the pretense was over, that I could stop pretending to be smaller than I was. They thought they'd cornered me, forced me into a position where I'd have to choose between dignity and security. What they didn't realize was that I'd never needed their security. I'd never needed anything from them except the satisfaction of watching their assumptions crumble. And in less than 3 days, they were going to get exactly what they'd always deserved. Not a gold digger desperate enough to sign their insulting prenup, not a grateful peasant thankful for their scraps. They were going to get the real me. And the real me was about to teach the Hartwell family a lesson they'd never forget. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the same table where I'd built Trendscope 5 years earlier, but this time I wasn't creating something new. I was preparing to reveal something that already existed, something that would shatter the Hartwell family's carefully constructed world in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. The first call I made was to Marcus Blackwood, my attorney who'd handled the Nexigen deal. It was 6:47 a.m., early enough that I caught him at home before his first cup of coffee, but Marcus had been my lawyer long enough to know that when I called before business hours, something significant was happening. "Autumn." His voice came through rough with sleep, but sharpening quickly. "Please tell me you're not calling to tell me you've been arrested." "Nothing like that," I said, though what I was about to do might cause just as much chaos. "I need you to prepare some documents, financial disclosure statements, asset verification, the full portfolio breakdown. Everything." There was a pause on his end, and I could practically hear him calculating. "That's a lot of confidential information to compile. What's this about?" "The Hartwells want me to sign a prenup. I think it's time they learned exactly who they've been insulting for the past 2 years." Whistled low. "How much detail are we talking about?" "All of it. The Trendscope sale, the investment returns, the real estate acquisitions, the cryptocurrency holdings, the art collection. I want them to see
Every single zero. I pulled up my latest portfolio statement on my laptop, the numbers glowing like ammunition in the morning light. 79 million had grown to just over 91 million through careful investments and compound interest. Autumn, are you sure about this? Once that information is out, there's no putting it back in the box. Your privacy, your security. My privacy was violated the moment they hired an investigator. My security was never in question, but theirs is about to be. The second call I made was to Dr. Rebecca Sterling at Nexigen. It was 7:15 a.m. Pacific time, which meant she'd be in her office reviewing market reports with her first espresso of the day. Rebecca had become something of a mentor since our deal, checking in periodically to see how I was adapting to sudden wealth. She was going to love this. The mysterious Autumn Chen. Her voice carried that slate smile I'd come to recognize. What brings you to call so early? Please tell me you've got another algorithm to sell me. Something better, I said. I need a favor, a public one. I explained the situation in broad strokes, the condescending family, the insulting prenup, the assumption that I was a gold digger. Rebecca listened without interruption, and when I finished, her laugh was sharp as broken glass. Let me get this straight. These people think you're after their money when you're sitting on one of the largest private tech fortunes of any woman under 30? That's exactly what they think. And you want me to make some noise about it. I want you to make a lot of noise about it. The third call was the most satisfying. At 9:30 a.m., I dialed the main number for Hartwell Real Estate Development and asked to be connected to Harold Hartwell's office. His secretary, a woman whose voice could frost windows, informed me that Mr. Hartwell was in meetings all morning. Tell him Autumn Chen called and that I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss some business propositions. I think he'll want to take this call. While I waited for Harold to call back, I opened my laptop and began crafting what would either be the most satisfying email of my life or the declaration of war that would end my relationship with the Hartwells forever. Possibly both. The email was addressed to Trevor, but I CC'd both his parents. The subject line was simple. Regarding the prenuptial agreement. I kept the tone professional, almost clinical. No emotion, no anger, just facts presented with the precision of a surgical strike. Dear Trevor, Clarissa, and Harold, thank you for providing the revised prenuptial agreement for my review. After careful consideration with my legal team, I believe there may be some fundamental misunderstandings about the financial dynamics of our upcoming marriage that need to be addressed. Then I attached Marcus's financial disclosure documents, all 27 pages of them.
Net worth, $91,247,336 as of the previous month. Primary income source, sale of proprietary technology platform to Nexigen Solutions for $79 million. Additional assets included a diversified investment portfolio, 3 commercial properties in emerging tech markets, and a collection of contemporary art that had appreciated significantly since purchase. But the real kicker was the final attachment, a counter prenup I'd had Marcus draft. In the event of divorce, Trevor would receive exactly $50,000 per year of marriage, capped at $500,000 total. No claim to any of my business assets, no rights to property I'd acquired before marriage, no spousal support beyond the initial settlement. Their exact terms flipped back on them like a mirror. Harold called back within an hour of receiving that email. His voice was strained, barely controlled, like a man who just discovered his house was built on quicksand. "Ms. Chin," he began, and I could hear him struggling to maintain his usual condescending tone while processing what he'd just learned. "There seems to be some confusion about these documents you've sent." "No confusion at all, Mr. Hartwell," I replied, settling back in my chair. Just information that should have been part of the conversation from the beginning, if anyone had bothered to ask the right questions. "You're telling me you're worth $91 million? I'm telling you, I've been worth significantly more than your family's estate since before I met your son,"
I said calmly. The investigator you hired did excellent work documenting my modest lifestyle choices, but apparently wasn't thorough enough to discover why someone might choose to live modestly despite having other options. The silence on his end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he recalculated every interaction we'd had, every snide comment, every moment of condescension. He was realizing that the woman he'd been treating like a gold digger could buy his entire real estate portfolio without touching her investment principal. We had no idea, he finally stammered. Of course you didn't. You were too busy assuming to bother learning, too busy protecting your precious legacy to consider that the woman your son chose might have her own. By noon, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Dr. Rebecca Sterling had made good on her promise to make noise. Nexigen's PR department had issued a statement congratulating me on my upcoming marriage, specifically mentioning my role as one of the youngest female tech entrepreneurs to successfully exit a startup for 9 figures. Forbes picked up the story within hours, running a piece titled, "Was Secret Millionaire? Tech Heiress Was Hiding in Plain Sight." LinkedIn was exploding with shares and comments. My old colleagues at Morrison & Associates were probably tagging each other, remembering every time they talked down to me or assumed I didn't understand business. The tech industry blogs were having a field day with the David and Goliath angle, except in this version, David had been secretly carrying a nuclear weapon the entire time. Trevor's text came at 2:17 p.m. "We need to talk. My parents are freaking out. This changes everything." I stared at that message for a long time. This changes everything, as if the revelation that I wasn't a fortune hunter somehow made me more worthy of respect, as if my bank balance was what should have mattered, not how they treated another human being. I typed back a single word: no. Then I turned off my phone and went to water my plants. The afternoon sun was streaming through my apartment windows, and everything seemed brighter somehow, cleaner, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after 2 years underwater. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow. The flowers were arranged, the catering was confirmed, and 200 guests were expecting to witness the union of Trevor Hartwell in his humble marketing coordinator fiancé. Instead, they were about to get the show of their lives. The morning of what should have been my wedding day, I woke up at sunrise without an alarm clock. No anxiety, no regret, no desperate urge to check my phone for frantic messages from the Hartwell family. Just peace, pure and crystalline, like the air after a storm has finally passed. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen, the same routine I'd followed for years, and sat by the window overlooking the riverside neighborhood where I'd grown up. The morning light caught the leaves on my monstera plant, the one I'd rescued from my office desk the day I quit Morrison & Associates. It had grown magnificently over the past 2 years, its broad leaves reaching towards the sun like it had finally found where it belonged. My phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. with messages I had no intention of reading. Trevor, his parents, wedding vendors, concerned relatives who'd heard whispers about complications. I let them all go to voicemail. Today wasn't about managing their crisis. Today was about something much more important. At 10 a.m., I drove to Willowbrick Care Center on the other side of Riverside. The building was modest, clean, with gardens that residents could see from their windows. It wasn't the luxury facility that the Hartwells would have chosen for their elderly relatives, but it was where my mother had worked as a nurse's aide for 12 years before her arthritis made the physical demands impossible.
I found her in the common room, helping Mrs. Patterson with the jigsaw puzzle of a lighthouse. Mom looked up when I walked in, and her face broke into the same warm smile that had gotten us through every difficult year of my childhood. "There's my successful daughter," she said, rising carefully from her chair to give me a hug. At 62, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her embrace still felt like coming home. "I saw that article about you in the newspaper, Forbes magazine. Can you imagine?" I could, actually, because I'd been imagining this moment for 2 years. The moment when I could finally tell her that all those nights she'd worked double shifts, all those times she'd chosen paying the electric bill over buying herself new shoes, all the sacrifices she'd made to give me opportunities she'd never had, it had all led to something extraordinary. "Mom," I said, settling into the chair beside her, We need to talk about some things. I told her everything about Trendscope, about the sale to Nexigen, about the investments that had grown our security into something unshakable. I explained about Trevor and his family's assumptions, about the prenup and the investigation, about the choice I'd made to walk away from their world entirely. She listened without interruption, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally shaking her head in amazement. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she finally said. "Not the money, though Lord knows that's wonderful. I'm proud that you didn't let them make you smaller than you are, that you didn't sign their papers and pretend to be grateful for scraps." That afternoon, we drove to the bank together. I'd already arranged everything with Marcus and my financial advisors, but I wanted Mom to be there when I transferred $5 million into a trust fund with her name on it. Not because she needed taking care of. She'd proven for decades that she could take care of herself and anyone else who needed it, but because she deserved the freedom to choose what came next. "I can't accept this," she said, staring at the bank documents. "You're not accepting it. You're letting me invest in the woman who invested everything in me first." Well, Mom met with the trust officer to discuss her options, maybe travel, maybe that master gardening course she'd always wanted to take, maybe just the luxury of not worrying about medical bills. I stepped outside to finally check my messages. 47 missed calls, 63 unread texts, a dozen emails marked urgent. I scrolled through them with detached curiosity, watching the Hartwell family's world unravel in real time through digital panic. Trevor's messages progressed from confused to desperate to angry to pleading. "Call me back. We can fix this. My parents want to apologize. Please don't let this end like this." Clarissa's single text was ice cold. "You've embarrassed our family. This vindictive behavior shows exactly the kind of person you really are." Harold had left 3 voicemails, each one more strained than the last. And the final one, his voice was barely recognizable. "Miss Chen, Autumn, perhaps we could discuss a business partnership. Your success in the tech sector, combined with our real estate expertise, there could be significant opportunities for mutual benefit." I deleted all of them without responding. The real satisfaction came from the other messages. Dr. Sterling from Nexigen congratulating me on the most elegant business power play I've seen in years. My former professor from community college who'd seen the Forbes article and wanted to tell me how proud she was. 3 headhunters who'd somehow gotten my number and were offering consulting opportunities that would make the Hartwell fortune look modest. But the message that made me smile was from an unknown number. "Saw your story online. I'm a junior developer getting pushed around by executives who steal my ideas. Thank you for showing me what fighting back looks like. SM." That evening, I cooked dinner in my apartment, the same apartment the Hartwells probably assumed I was desperate to escape. I'd received offers on 3 luxury condos in Windermere Hills since the Forbes article broke, but I wasn't ready to leave Riverside yet. Maybe I never would be. This was where I'd learned that worth isn't measured by zip codes or family names, where my mother had shown me that dignity comes from how you treat others, not how others treat you. As the sun set over the city, painting my small living room in shades of gold, I opened my laptop one final time. Not to build another algorithm or plan another business venture, but to write. I'd been thinking about starting a blog for young entrepreneurs, especially women from backgrounds like mine who might think they don't belong in boardrooms and venture capital meetings. The first post wrote itself, on walking away from tables where you're not respected. I wrote about recognizing your value independent of others' opinions, about the difference between confidence and arrogance, between protecting assets and protecting ego, about how the most powerful word in business
and in life is sometimes just no.
As I finished writing, my phone buzzed with one last message. This one was from Marcus. Trevor Hartwell just called my office. He wants to know if you'll meet with him tomorrow to discuss reconciliation. What should I tell him? I looked around my apartment, at the monstera plant thriving in the corner, at the photographs of my mother and me at my community college graduation, at the laptop that had generated more wealth than the Hartwells could imagine, at the life I'd built by being exactly who I was, not who others expected me to be. I typed back, "Tell him I'm busy. Tell him I'm building something bigger than he could ever understand. Tell him I said no." Then I closed the laptop and made myself a cup of tea. Tomorrow I would start my consulting firm. I would fund scholarships for first-generation college students. I would invest in other women's startups and mentor young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. The Hartwells thought they were dealing with someone who needed their approval, their money, their acceptance into their exclusive world. What they discovered too late was that I had never needed any of those things. I'd built my own world, one where value wasn't inherited, but created, where respect was earned through character rather than birthright. 3 days ago, Clarissa Hartwell had placed a prenup on her mahogany table and smiled like a spider who'd caught her prey. She thought she was protecting her family's legacy from a gold digger. Instead, she'd revealed her family's character to someone who'd already won a game they didn't know was being played. And the best part? I'd never raised my voice, never lost my composure, never done anything but show them exactly who they'd been underestimating all along. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply being too successful to need the people who once made you feel small. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.